Now that you've got the right shoes, you're ready to hit the trails. But what about fueling your body? The secret isn't just training and running, it's all about your nutrition. Today, we're breaking it all down so you can fuel smarter and run stronger. My guest today is Jenna Bowes, a trail runner and registered dietitian specializing in endurance sports nutrition, offering practical tips to set you up for success on the trails. Jenna and I discuss the best foods to eat before, during, and after your run, how to fuel for your first race and avoid those horrible gut issues, common nutrition mistakes new runners make, and how to balance real food versus sports nutrition products. Jenna, welcome back to the Trail Chasers.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Absolute pleasure. So we're doing things a bit differently, and we're kind of going back to that, is to create like a beginner's guide to trail running. Throughout the season, we want to take people on a bit of a journey. Now going into this, obviously it's going to be all about nutrition, and it's kind of like at a point where people are, that very beginning phase, might have entered their first race, probably 5-10 Ks. Every episode, we are going to break down into almost like a trail run. So every kind of 15 minutes, we'll have a little bit of a break for a bit of a question that's related but unrelated to what we're talking about. And I want to get started with, I said it's about a trail run. So when you're kind of on the start line of a race or at the beginning of a trail run, what are you doing? What's going through your mind? What's happening?
Sure. I think whenever you're starting any event, you kind of panic to say, well, am I here and am I ready? Well, I am here. There's no turning back. Am I ready? Have I done enough? Does the training that I did put in place, has that got me to where I need to be? Is it going to materialize into the results that I want to? It's kind of like all unknown. And even if it's not your first time, you never actually know race to race exactly how your body's going to respond. I mean, I did Bastille last year and I kicked a rock on the start line, fell on my face in front of everyone. And that was that. I mean, I got up sheepishly, continued running, but it wasn't what I pictured or what the training I'd put in I hoped to materialize into.
Yeah, that's always the tricky, but well done for carrying on. I think that's the most important thing. So this season is sponsored by Gilnockie Socks, and we've got them to design a pair of socks for us. I'm going to show it to you here. So this is what it looks like. And what I'm going to do, I'm not going to put you on the spot now, but I'm going to ask you to think through the episode of what 2 words you want on the back of your sock, or you would have on the back of your sock. Obviously, bearing in mind it'll probably be more likely for the person behind you rather than the person yourself. So think about it. Don't think about it too hard. Don't let it distract you, and we'll chat about it at the end. This is not meant to be like a deep introspective question or interview. So off the top of your head, what are the kind of 5 most pivotal moments that in your life that have kind of led you to this point?
In terms of dietetics or in terms of training in general?
I don't want to limit you, but like dietetics, but also obviously, what has made you into who you are today?
As a junior, I played a lot of sport quite competitively, and I remember going to school and falling asleep in my science classes. So I love science, actually. I mean, this is where we are today. But ironically, falling asleep, and my teacher called my mom and said, listen, if she keeps falling asleep, we're going to have to pull her sport. So I went to see a dietitian, and there the dietitian taught me how to count my almonds and count my grapes. And although that wasn't the most fun, it really made such a huge difference, and that attracted me to do what I do today. I couldn't believe the difference it made in terms of just energy and getting through the day and mental kind of alertness and focus and so on. I think the willingness to then kind of evolve that into a profession, but also having then the ability to use that energy in terms of sport meant that sport didn't kind of start and end at school. It started to materialize into things that were longer and more in the endurance space, like the running. The big thing that finally kind of like hit home for me was having more of a group training type of mentality, which I'd never embarked on previously. And when I first started doing triathlon training, I looked for a group to join. And meeting people that were like-minded, meeting people that had kind of like the same willingness to get up at stupid hours of the day and fit in silly, training schedules or silly sessions that left us bleeding through our eyeballs was so wonderful, because you realize like, this isn't something weird that I enjoy doing. There's actually a whole lot of people that enjoy doing this. And that kind of made me want to meet more of those people and participate in more of those events and see what else was out there. And then I think especially in the run endurance space, a road can be quite limiting. A trail is forever changing. So even myself, I like to train in a group mentality. I like to train on my own. I even like to train with my husband. And my husband and I specifically, we went the other day again just to kind of jog through Newlands. And it's never the same. Like, no two sessions are identical, no two runs are ever identical, no two races are ever identical. So in a world that can be a little bit monotonous, and my job definitely isn't, and kind of the sport that I participate in never is either. So kind of the junior leading into the profession leading back into the sport leading into meeting people has just been probably 3, not 5, but it's kind of why we are where we are today.
And obviously, if you maybe even do have a business card, but on your business card, I mean, besides from the fact that it'll probably say dietitian, what else is it saying, in terms of life and in terms of who you are?
My business card is black and white, which is actually weird because I think I'm quite a colourful person, but I think I see things quite black and white, and I try and teach people to work within the grey. So maybe that's a bit of a contradiction. But I like clear-cut lines. I like to know the science around it, and I think the grey comes into the application of that. Yeah. So I'm quite clear cut. I don't like too much mystery, but my business cards are black and white. So I clearly do like the structure, the end point, the knowing the end point.
Maybe I should add what color and what font is your business card into my questions going forward. You've obviously worked with runners, road runners, trail runners of kind of all levels. What's the one piece of advice that you think kind of all trail runners should know, or the first thing that they should kind of know going into the sport?
That terrain differs. I think that's the one thing that people often forget. I have a gentleman who I actually saw this morning, and in so doing, he had entered a 15K trail run as his first trail run ever after training 5Ks on the green belts.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that was exactly my response. Oh, wow, because that's something that I think there is such a misunderstanding of what trail actually means. I mean, I still remember a run I did through Takai Forest like many moons ago, and the guy that started on the start line with me walked up all the hills and he smashed me in the race. I mean, there I was running up all the hills. So I think that a lot of people that get into trail running don't actually understand it for what it is. Yes, there's a competitive person who's going to not kind of miss a beat and run the entire thing, but there's also a component of understanding the terrain, understanding why you're out there, understanding your goals, why you kind of are doing it as a starting point.
I love that. And, to take a bit of a break, if you're out running, and you're in a race or you're on a trail, what is the one thing you're kind of reaching for in your pack? Your favorite thing? Yeah.
Sure, I love the burn. I really do. I like pushing myself. I like feeling like I've worked. I like emptying the tank. That's me. I am very competitive with myself. I think that's not always a positive, but it does drive me to want to be better. So I do like to have a bit of a scan of results, see what I can achieve within my own capacity. So that's me. Unfortunately, I do like to kind of give it 150%, kind of no matter the event.
And nutrition-wise, what are you packing? What are you whole foods? Are you gels? What are you going with?
I think it depends on the race. I'm a little bit of a combination person. I definitely enjoy using my teeth and not just swallowing liquids. But from a practical standpoint, goos and gels or your kind of liquids and semi-liquid sports products are definitely what runners need to be aware they have to get used to, just because there's the practical side of having a limited capacity to carry, and when your heart rate's through the roof, it's really hard to put back a dry bread kind of roll or sandwich. So there's a time and a place for everything. I love a good combination. It also depends, if it's going to be a really short, sharp, fast race, you can get away with the liquids and semi-liquids. But as soon as you're going 3+ hours, you need to understand that you're going to probably get a lot of flavor fatigue. You're going to get that over-sweetness flavor or kind of a feeling that you can't take it anymore. And that's often where the solids do start to help. And solids can be something like a jelly sweet. It doesn't have to be, a full or a roll or something that's super dry. You can have quite a lot of fun with it.
And, going into kind of the pre-run or the pre-race, I think it's something that I guess a lot of beginners probably neglect. A lot of people would think, yes, it's important to eat on the run, but they don't kind of factor in what happened before the run. So when it comes to, pre-run as a beginner, going out doing like a 5, 10K trail, what are the things you're looking for to eat, and then what are the time frames that you should be doing it?
I think the one area that we can talk to as well is that your person who's starting out doesn't always see themselves as an athlete. They might just see themselves as like someone who's getting into trail for like quite recreational in their performance. And I think the definition talks for itself. So anyone who's going to train towards improving in a single sport dynamic is in fact an athlete. So we then don't act like athletes if we don't believe we are athletes. So leading up into an event or a training or something along those lines, you'll find that there's a tendency towards skipping meals or not being good with our basic healthy everyday nutrition. And then suddenly, waking up and getting to either the start line or getting to the beginning of a training run, feeling really flat, even though we've got up and eaten breakfast. So you can almost equate it to driving your car every single day and then not filling up when your petrol light comes on, but then getting in the car and only putting a whack of petrol in when you're going to drive a long distance. Your car needs petrol even for those small distances that it's driving every single day, not just for the long stuff. So I think the first bit of advice would be to not just focus on the morning of or even the night before. You almost need to make sure that your basic diet is quite healthy. When it comes to your day before, you do want to have, depending on personal preference, but you don't want to go and have a carb-free day. Carbohydrates are definitely energy for your body. It's your primary source of fuel. So going and having like eggs for breakfast and a tuna salad for lunch and a piece of steak, and green veggies for supper is going to not leave you feeling very energized and could actually leave you feeling quite full. Protein's wonderful. Vegetables are wonderful, don't get me wrong. But when you're wanting to wake up and have a good appetite in the morning to get in a decent breakfast before, you don't really want to wake up too heavy. So a lighter meal the day before would be ideal. And then the morning of, you wanting to make sure that you are eating. And the time before does take a huge role because your digestive system is going to take 1 to 2 hours to empty. So the more work you're going to put in for it, so the high proteins, high fats, high carbs in terms of your meals, you're going to need to give your system a bit of time to break that down. So eating something more balanced would require you to eat at least 1 to 2 hours before a session. As soon as you get closer towards that start time, you have to limit either the volume or the amount of fiber, the amount of protein, because that's going to leave you feeling, pretty gross when you start raising your heart rate or start running. So hour and a half before, something a little bit more balanced, tried and tested, obviously, and then within that 30-minute to an hour window, definitely looking at reducing the fibers, the proteins. And that's kind of morning of. And the morning of is, in my opinion, pretty much a non-negotiable. Sports performance is all about delaying fatigue. So you're not going to be able to get in as much as what you like to believe you would during a race. So you have to make sure that your stores are well replenished in that week and in that day leading in, and then kind of giving yourself good fuel availability the morning of is pretty crucial.
If you're running a sort of 5, 10K, is it possible to kind of run on just pre-race food or fuel? Or is it kind of recommended, even though it is kind of a short distance, to include some type of nutrition in your race?
Not everyone's great at eating beforehand. So if you're going to take in less beforehand, you can definitely consider topping up immediately once you start the race. And that's going to be personal also in terms of like what can be tolerated during actually running or during the movement process. So you can. Is it necessary? Probably not. You can go 5, 10 Ks and then you can run straight up a mountain. That can take you quite a long time.
Yeah.
So I do try and recommend that you base it on time versus distance. It's going to give you a better understanding of what to expect, of how long you're going to be out there. Your muscles do have at least 90 minutes of stored glycogen at a relatively low intensity, about 60 minutes if you're going to be working that much harder, as long as, like we said, you actually refueling throughout that time leading into the event. So yes, if you have a good pre-workout, you don't, in theory, need to take anything during. Anything within that kind of like 60-minute window, you're fine. As soon as you're going 60, 90 minutes plus, you definitely want to consider taking something during. And sooner is always better. So if you know that it's 5 Ks, but it's going to go over an hour, or it's 10 Ks, it's going to go over an hour, you want to start looking at fueling while your system is not too fatigued.
Why is that?
Well, your digestive system is also going to become fatigued, and as you fatigue throughout that run, your absorption is going to become inhibited. So you'll have more gastric stress happening. You'll have poorer tolerance of what you're putting in. So you wanting to make sure that on a fresh system, a system that's going to tolerate food that much better, or glucose or your carb that you're putting in of your choice. You want to get that in before fatigue starts to come in.
I mean, obviously that's on the nutrition side, but then talk on the hydration side, because I think that's kind of a non-negotiable no matter the distance. Certainly in kind of summer in Cape Town. But I mean, is it a non-negotiable?
I think we're all very naughty with water. Your general recommendations is about a glass of water per 10 kgs of body weight. And then you've got to look at the individual sweat rate and then the sweat concentration. Hydration becomes a bit more tricky post an hour and a half, more so even post 3 hours. So it's looking at more of your endurance events where hydration strategies are non-negotiables that you're starting to having to work in. If you're going into an event really well hydrated, I'm not saying overhydrated. I think that's a fundamental flaw. A lot of athletes or a lot of exercisers go in with too much water. But if you go in with a good hydration status, a good indication of that is your first kind of wee or your first urine sample. The day should actually be pale yellow. It shouldn't be translucent. And as soon as you've added water consumption in, or you've done some exercise, you're going to distort that. So you can't rely on urine color elsewhere. But as long as you go into an event well hydrated, anything within an hour, you can almost sip throughout. I think you can try and aim on getting in like 500 mils of liquid throughout that hour if you are a very heavy sweater. But more than that, we often see that there's more overhydration than there is underhydration. And in endurance sport, we're all going to become dehydrated to some degree. Yeah. It's just because of how much we lose.
With the overhydration, is it kind of a case of people drinking too much water and not enough like sodium or like a hydrate solution with that water?
Yeah, very oftenly so. I think your fluid intake would be based quite personally in terms of what you sweat. So you can do that by jumping on and off a scale. Obviously, you'd need to take into account what you drank during your session, but you would need to weigh yourself before a session, weigh yourself after a session, a couple of runs. So 3 or 4 runs, for example, get an average, and that would give you an indication of how much sweat you're losing in terms of volume. And ideally, you're trying to get that back in per hour of your exercise. If you're a high sweater, you can be losing on the upper end of a litre plus, especially in hot summer or humid environments. So it's very difficult as a runner to get in a litre of liquid per hour. So we don't always get that right. So even 50% of that would be wonderful in terms of achieving. Your hydration strategies are more important when you do go 3 hours plus, as mentioned, but you can look at helping yourself retain a little bit of water or regulate thirst by adding in an electrolyte or a sodium component to your kind of fueling strategy. Again, more important for the longer stuff, but that's a different equation altogether. So you can get a big sweater who doesn't lose that much sodium, or you can get a low sweater who loses a lot of sodium. So concentration of sweat matters. You would know that roughly if you saw kind of sweat stains on your cap or your clothes, or you could feel it on your face, or even if you could see it. So that means that you do want to try and put sodium in part of your protocol. But again, it's not always more is more, or more is better, because you are looking at putting extra pressure from a filtration rate on your kidneys. So you can go on the slightly lower, more conservative side of that. 300, 200, 300, maybe 500 milligrams of sodium per hour would be more than adequate to go and kind of shoot the lights out and go for 1,000, 1,500 plus milligrams of sodium per hour. It's just simply too much. You don't need that. We definitely don't know that you need that. So from that perspective, hydration strategies need to be thought of, but it would be better in a slightly shorter event to go in well hydrated and rehydrate adequately after the event than to try and chug liters of water leading up and liters of water afterwards, because like you mentioned, water without the sodium can actually really distort our electrolyte balance and leave us quite ill. It's actually very dangerous.
Obviously, with a beginner going for these kind of shorter distances, the kind of, I guess, pre and post becomes a lot more important. And then after I think it's a big pre, I guess, you're still in that frame of mind where you can consume stuff and, but then the post run, even if it's a 5K or 10K, often we don't kind of feel like eating or feel like fueling. So what is the importance of that kind of post-run, and what are the kind of parameters or the components to it?
So your recovery is best, males have a slightly longer recovery windows than females, but your recovery is best as soon after completion as possible. So you're wanting to rehydrate and you're wanting to replace what you've used. You've used carbs, so you're wanting to replace carb. You've probably got a degree of muscle breakdown, so you're wanting to add in protein to help with protein kind of synthesis and healing adaptation towards the training, and you're wanting to rehydrate. Rehydration will also actually help in terms of kind of stabilizing you from an appetite perspective for the rest of the day, as well as helping you recover from the exercise that you're doing. So those three, in terms of recovery, looking at your carb consumption, your protein consumption, and your sodium consumption, all need to be considered. And ideally, timing would be close to completion. The closer almost the better. That doesn't always have to be in a solid form. It can be in a liquid form. It can be in a combination of solid and liquid. So you can drink a bottle of Rehydrate. Different brands give you different options for that on the market. You can drink a protein drink. You can drink a recovery drink with carb and protein. Or you could eat your carb, eat a banana, have a yogurt, and drink a bottle of electrolyte. And that could, in essence, kickstart a recovery. So it's personal. If appetite is suppressed because of exercise, and you know that you've got, a big training event coming up or a big event coming up that you want to speed up recovery for, put emphasis into your recovery. If you've got, the next 24, 48, even 72 hours to pull back a little bit in the training and just rest and recover, then ultimately your good quality diet should help with the recovery from that.
And how do you kind of work out what you need to be consuming post-race?
So the ideal in terms of what's been researched is you've got about a 4 or 3 to 1 ratio of carbohydrate to protein. That's moved a little bit more to 2 to 1, and in some cases personal preference is a 1 to 1. But basically, if you're looking at it from a protein perspective, if you're looking at 20 to 30 grams almost minimum for part of your recovery, then you're looking at pairing that with at least minimum 20, 30 grams of carbohydrate. If you're ideally looking at best recovery, then you kind of doubling, if not tripling that, to get in roughly 60 to 90 grams of carbs with 20 to 30 grams of protein. You can do that in a drink form. There are lots of recovery products on the market. Products on the market in a complete recovery form obviously are general population standards, so they're not always for the individual. So I'll work with an individual to say, this product has this, but it's maybe lacking this, add this into it, or eat this with it, or, this is a great carb, but this would be a better protein, and you can have those as 2 separate options, in which case both liquid, you've got both your proteins, your carbs kind of sorted, and you even covering your hydration from that standpoint as well. A lot of these events often have, something on afterwards, and you might say, well, there is something like an egg and bacon roll, just for example. There would be nothing wrong with using a food approach in that stage. So like your roll is going to give you carb, your egg and bacon is going to give you protein, and then you can have, a glass of water with that because the bacon's going to be pretty salty. So recovery Well, sports nutrition doesn't always need to be put in this like finite box. You can understand the event, understand yourself, know what you're looking for, and then really be quite practical in your application.
Just going back to that, I think I've had a lot of people who are starting out running, are quite fatigued around the amount of products that are out there. How does one even, go about assessing what they should be taking or they shouldn't be taking? Or, is it kind of looking at the ingredients? Is it expert advice? How do you?
Sure. It's a very good question. And
yeah.
sports product is so expensive. So often that will dictate someone's choice. If one gel is going to cost 30 Rand and the next gel is going to cost 90 Rand and you're using a gel every single weekend, you're probably going to go on the cheaper of the options until you get something that dictates it. So if you have really bad gut response to a gel, you're going to go on something that's marketed to have better gut tolerance. Or if you're going to go on personal flavor preference, you might get drawn to a brand according to flavor. You might get drawn to a brand according to availability of that brand. Not everyone wants to spend hours researching where you can buy certain products versus going into something like a discount or a pharmacy that actually has a range of what you might like or what you might see. Sometimes I advise the use of products based on the event that's going to be done, especially like I mentioned right at the beginning, often sports nutrition is quite practical in approach. So if you're going to go to an event that's got a specific sports nutrition sponsor, you want to be familiar with that brand. Yeah. So if you do then go and use something at one of the seconding tables or something like that, it's not the first time you've ever tried it or you don't have a clue how it's going to sit in your system. So product familiarity, often according to the event that you're doing, that's one thing that definitely you need to take into account. And then what I've noticed a lot in practice is that I almost get these little population groups. So the trail runners like a certain brand and the triathletes like a certain brand and the mountain bikers. And so often it's just word of mouth.
Yeah.
So you and I trained together. I've tried this product, really liked it, think it's amazing. I've then gone and recommended it to you and then kind of word spreads from there. So often I just say to people, what have you tried? What do you like? Does it work? And then I don't always change it. If it doesn't work or if they are doing something like Otter Trail and they've just brought a new sponsor on board, like I'm going to recommend that you go and you try that range out according to what's available. And very often your events are quite open about who are on board in terms of nutrition sponsors or what's going to be at aid station. Like the Maxi Trail coming up in Stellenbosch, they've put it out there ready in terms of what exactly you can expect at those different stations.
What are the labels? There's obviously products that have carbs, products that just have sodium. How would you kind of determine that, that the product kind of is just a sodium or like is not a carb product or, this is a nutrition product? This is a hydrate product. How do you kind of make that distinction? Is it pretty clear generally?
Not always, because so many people will market things according to what their product is supposed to be selling. So especially nowadays, there's this massive drive towards electrolyte consumption, and electrolytes do not provide you with energy. In terms of energy being the carbohydrate. So if you're going to go and look at energy, you're wanting to use something that gives you energy. So carbohydrate is energy that your body uses. If your product does not contain carbohydrate, then the energy it's getting is not, in essence, let's call it real energy for lack of a better explanation. So sodium will help you with energy, but sodium and carb actually go together. So you will have better absorption if the two are both present. It's similar to that of something like caffeine. Caffeine is a wonderful source of energy, but if there isn't carb present as well, you're going to kind of not get the actual physical energy. You're more going to get blocked passages within your system that are telling you that they would be telling you fatigued if caffeine wasn't present, but because caffeine is present, you're actually getting this fake sense of energy. So when we're providing our system with energy, we want it to actually get energy. We don't want it to kind of perform and not have energy to back itself up, because in essence that's going to create issues in terms of delayed recovery and adaptation and so on. So caffeine can be an energy, it's a wonderful source, but it doesn't have energy unless there's sugar or a glucose or a maltodextrin or fructose or whatever that product brand has decided to use as their glucose composition or their carbohydrate composition. So there's some that are linked to better gut tolerance than others in terms of fructose or glucose might be a little bit cheaper than something like a maltodextrin. So you often see that the more complex the different type of carb that they've built into their brand can often affect the price of that product, and often gets taught to in terms of kind of gut tolerance in certain brands as well. So you would need to, I'm not going to say have an issue to need to investigate it further, but you'd actually want to go and see, this has got a carb, it doesn't sit well for me. Why doesn't it sit well? Oh, look, these are the sugars that it's got in. The kind of the rehydrate and those types of products that taste sweet, you would need to understand why they taste sweet. So the good old, rehydrate the boxes that have been around for donkey's years, those have got some carbohydrate in them. It's not a hell of a lot, but it definitely does have. Whereas your other brands often will use sweeteners to give it a decent flavor. But a sweetener, or what we talk about as a non-nutritive sweetener, doesn't have any calories. So that doesn't have, in fact, any true energy. So you're just getting the sodium. So kind of to wrap that up is, if you're looking at a fueling strategy, we can simplify to just the carbohydrate for energy and then the sodium for hydration. And products can have both. Products can have individuals, kind of either the sodium or the carbohydrate, but ultimately when you are planning your nutrition strategy, you've got to take both into account.
Trail running beats up everything. Your legs, your lungs, and especially your feet. The last thing you need is socks that give up before you do. That's why I'm thrilled to announce that this season of Trail Chasers is sponsored by Gilnockie Socks. These aren't just your run-of-the-mill socks. Gilnockie socks are made for people who demand more. More performance, more durability, and more comfort. They're designed to prevent blisters with premium moisture-wicking materials that keep your feet dry no matter how long or muddy the trail gets. Plus, they're treated with HydroCool and Silver Plus, so they stay fresh, breathable, and ready for your next adventure. Since I started using Gilnockie socks, I haven't had to stop mid-run to adjust or worry about discomfort. They just keep working mile after mile, run after run. So why settle for socks that don't keep up? Visit gilnockie.com and use the code TRAILCHASERS at checkout for 20% off your first order. Trust me, once you try them, you won't go back. Your feet will thank you. For beginners kind of starting out, would you kind of recommend combining, or would you kind of recommend keeping it separate?
A lot of your carb drinks have a component of sodium in it, in which case you could almost get away with drinking a drink that's got both carb and electrolyte in it. You mentioned earlier, if someone was able to eat or not be able to eat before a session, would they need to eat something within like a 5K or 10K run? You could then say, if you haven't eaten so well beforehand and you wanted to take like a carb drink or something with you, then that would fulfill your carb, and your electrolyte composition. But if you were to have eaten the carb beforehand, maybe you're only wanting to take the electrolyte during. So again, depending on that individual, you could absolutely use 2-for-1, so a carb drink with an electrolyte in it. But when temperature starts to play a role and high sweat rate starts to play a role, then it's never my recommendation to keep it together. Then I always try and separate your carbohydrate and your hydration. And the reason is because your carbs and your sodium both compete for fluid. So you can actually become a little bit dehydrated if you overdo either the sodium or the glucose. In essence, if you were to become dehydrated, you would actually want to rather reduce a little bit of the carbohydrate to allow your body to not have to compete for hydration with glucose absorption.
Coming back to running a trail race or trail run, and you're out there and it starts to rain. What is the strategy? Are you embracing it, or you're heading down the mountain for the exit?
Me personally, embrace it. Absolutely. Okay. Keep going. Definitely don't stop. Yeah. You're out there already. I think like starting in the rain, a little bit more difficult than being out there when it starts raining.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. What are the kind of the biggest mistakes in terms of nutrition and hydration that you see beginners kind of making?
Underestimating as well as overestimating. So can't really kind of simplify that too much more than I think we give exercise, shorter duration exercise, quite a lot of credit for calorie burn. In kind of, then on the other side, we don't give it enough credit. So we won't fuel correctly because it's just a 30-minute run.
Yeah.
But we kind of will also go and drink 2 Energates because we went on a 30-minute run. So there's either side of the scale often that I see with patients, and it's often a patient type. But if you're going and looking at fueling, a beginner or a 30-minute or a shorter duration run, it can be done with the rest of your diet. But the person who doesn't see the 30-minute run as exercise might actually not have eaten substantially to have supported that in the starting point. So if it is just the 30-minute run and they've already had, a lunch, they're going out in the evening and the lunch contained carbohydrate, I question whether or not the shorter duration stuff actually needs addition to your normal diet. But if that person was to have had like a tuna salad for lunch without any carbohydrate, then that 30-minute run would actually need to be fueled. So I think it's more a misunderstanding of the individual, their requirement for the event that they're actually trying to do, because in essence, the fitter you are, the lower the heart rate, the easier the run. The less fit you are, the higher the heart rate, the harder the run, irrespective of it only being 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So we would in essence fuel someone who is less fit more than someone who was fit and really well adapted. The contradiction to that would be the person who's more fit would be better adapted to utilizing carb and probably manage it better than the person who had never taken in any form of fuel in and around exercise. So I think, the hydration side is that, do we all drink enough water? So potentially dehydration becomes a problem because of poor hydration strategies in general. And then do we overdo carb thinking that exercise is well worth way more than what we actually think it is? Or do we completely underdo it because we don't give exercise and learning something the respect that it needs? So not a very clear-cut answer there, sorry.
No, it's all good. And, not properly fueling before a run, in terms of just performance, what is kind of that doing to your performance? Is it slowing you down? Is it making you weaker? What is the actual, what's happening to your performance because you haven't properly fueled?
So exercise itself is a stress. As soon as you underfuel, you don't give yourself energy for exercise, you're exacerbating that stress even more so. We all need to go through a degree of stress in order to adapt to what it is that you are trying to achieve. But if you're not giving yourself the ingredients in order to allow your system to adapt, it's not going to adapt. So you underfuel, you don't have a good session, so you're not going to be working as hard as what you could. Your session is going to be higher effort. It's going to perceive to be that much harder than it actually potentially was. You're going to exacerbate the stress because you haven't had that fuel to allow the body to work optimally. It's got to then kind of make its energy itself. And in essence, the making its energy itself is a breakdown of reserves, which often leaves us with low energy available for muscle growth, rehabilitation, or more adaptation, if I say that in a better way. So pulling energy available for recovery into exercise, and that will delay your recovery, delay your adaptation. So you're not going to get as good of a session out, and you're also going to have more stress because of that session, or as a result of underfueling that session, and the adaptation to that session is going to be that much poorer.
One of the things that I do or I've done and I see people doing is, the recovery is kind of, you don't recover, you don't do your recovery as well as you kind of do your pre and during, just because you're not going into something immediately. So what is the effect on a proper recovery on your kind of next session?
It's almost as important as your pre, because if you think about your recovery from your session being your pre-workout for your next session, it's going to allow you to take away the stress that session had. It's going to allow you to adapt to the session that you've just had. It's going to allow your muscles to recover faster. So it's in essence setting you up for a session to happen sooner. And if you go into a session really fatigued and sore and uncomfortable, you're not going to get as much out of that next session. You start to snowball. So muscle needs enough to help with recovery, but also the rest of your system does. So what we'll often see is that you'll get impact on immunity, getting sick, which will ultimately lead to missing sessions as well.
Looking at, different ways of fitting your kind of run into your day? Is there kind of a time when you should, obviously with races and stuff, it's always first thing in the morning, but when you're kind of training, is there a preferred time to kind of slot that into your day?
No, not at all, actually. I think that nutrition can work around your lifestyle, and it's something that's important to remember. I've got an ultra-distance runner at the moment who drops kids off and then goes and plays in the mountains for hours on end. And that just means that your fueling has to be adapted towards that training. Not everyone has the luxury of being a full-time athlete, so generally it will be around working hours, and then your day is going to dictate where you have time, allocated to train. It can be middle of the day, can be first thing, it can be last thing. I think some of us are just morning people. It is perhaps a habit that we create. There's other things that you can take into account, like if you're going to be racing in really hot conditions, you might want to train later in the day to try and simulate that a little bit to get a degree of adaptation, because we adapt to heat, we adapt to climate, to altitudes, etc. But the actual essence of the time of day that you train is less important than how you would fuel the session accordingly. You can always use your breakfast, your lunch, or your supper as your fuel. So it's not to say that you couldn't go and do a training session after, a breakfast or after a lunch. It's just also how you're going to feel in that session. Are you able to get max out of it?
So when it comes to kind of that type of thing, what would your recommendation? Would it be, have your breakfast, have something before, and then kind of go run, or would it be use the kind of breakfast to fuel and then the recovery as, like a meal, something like that?
Completely right. You can go and use your breakfast to fuel. Your breakfast would then obviously be the carb composition. And if your breakfast was something, for example, a scrambled egg on toast, that's not going to leave your system feeling too light and wonderful 30 minutes after consumption. So a more, call it balanced breakfast or lunch or supper, you're going to take about an hour to 2 hours after that to utilize that as fuel and not feel too heavy. Whereas if you did go for something lighter because you knew you were going to kind of go out training, you might decide that breakfast might be something a little bit easier to digest, be it like a Future Life or a bowl of oats or something a bit more simple, high carb, slightly lower fiber and protein. It's not to say that you can't ever have fiber protein before you start running. It would just be a degree of how adapted your gut was. So if it's a bigger, heavier meal, you're going to just have a little bit more time before you go. And if it was a lighter meal, less time before you go. You could then go and use your mid-morning snack, for example, as a recovery. And if you weren't to be a snack in the middle of the morning, you could then go and start off with something along the lines of like a protein smoothie with some fruit and oats and some protein powder, some milk, some yogurt, whatever you kind of tolerated to get the carb and protein in, and then follow on to your lunch. The other side would be is if your breakfast then kind of allowed you 1 to 2 hours delay before you started your exercise session, and you finished your exercise session and then you were kind of home for lunch, you could then use your next main meal as your full recovery as well.
Yeah, so interesting. And going back to the running, you did chat a bit about, in terms of yourself personally, what are the kind of go-to snacks that you're packing, like for short, long, for your exercise?
I'm a hot cross bun person. Okay. I don't think I'm ever going to change my tune on that. Yeah, I love a hot cross bun. I love convenience. I think that I've often been termed the naughty dietitian before, because I think that there's areas that we don't know that all food fits. It's just a matter of how and when. So if you like a bag of wine gums, why not use wine gums as part of a fueling strategy? If you like the convenience of walking into Woolworths and walking out with a sports nutrition option, you could kind of use one of their Woolies Go pouches, which is in essence like a purity pouch for adults. You could go and just go for a good old banana. So I think the main aim is to say, if you're going to go into a session that's going to be super high intensity, it's going to be a race, it's going to be something that's of high importance, you don't really want to wing your nutrition. But if you are going to go into something that's maybe a training a type of session, or something that you can then trial out different products, you then going to go for something that's going to contain carbohydrates. So a food-based approach, probably going to do fruit, perhaps like a dried fruit, like a fruit dainty. I always have those in my cupboard nowadays for my toddler. Always have purity pouches nowadays. Things have changed clearly. But hot cross buns, morning, I do a cup of hot chocolate and a rusk. That's my absolute go-to in the winter. It's giving some hydration. So obviously giving the carb in both the rusk and the hot chocolate. So it is quite personal, but it's also, it's carb-based, you know. So if you've got bagels that you might use for weekend breakfast, you can have a bagel or half a bagel with some jam or honey to top. So the aim of the game as a pre-workout is the food that you're choosing. Does it contain carb? Is it going to sit? Is it relatively easy to digest? Those would be your biggest considerations.
Yeah. You know, going into how much carbs you actually need to actually fuel a run, but then also determining in terms of, like you said, like a bagel, you know, how would you then determine the sort of carb content of that meal? You know, obviously when you're picking up a bar or a drink or something, it's all written there. But when it comes to something like, say, a bagel and jam, you know, how would you then go about determining how much carb that would have?
So the sports nutrition world gives you the consistency of numbers. They're going to say, well, this amount in this portion is tried and tested to sit well in terms of a gut tolerance perspective. So that's the comfort that sports nutrition gives you. But when you do your own thing, as in like, you know, a jam bagel, or if you were to kind of eat like a couple of fruit dainties and you know how much it is per 100 grams, but like, you know, what is the mass backwards? You could do basic equations according to reading food labels and familiarizing yourself with a portion of jam or a portion of honey. You know, what does a tablespoon give you? And then a bagel, what does that give you? And then doing the math of adding it all together. So a dietitian can help you with that, obviously, and familiarizing yourself with the product and the labels would be able to give you an idea. Because food is obviously bigger in terms of portion, you will find that a sports product might be smaller in volume to consume than a more food-based approach. You could have like, you know, 5 or 6 baked potatoes in equivalent volume of carb to just one gel. So if it was to be made by you, you would want to do a bit of the back end label reading and the maths, do the calculations, add it up. And if it's a brand that you're using the whole product of, then you could go and see what is the carb content per portion of what you're having.
Yeah. And then, you know, for actual exercise, what is the kind of rule of thumb around carbs per hour, you know, that you should be taking in?
So science is pretty clear to say that we can tolerate and absorb 1 to 1.6 grams of carbs per minute. So that takes you to 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. The most important thing is that you increase that incrementally. Pretty much confident to say that most people can tolerate between 30 and 60 grams of carbs. But if I was to tell you that you then need to eat 3 bananas on a run or 3 gels on a run, you know, the looks I get on the other side to say, well, I have to take more than 1 gel in a 3-hour run is pretty astounding to me, to be honest, that people don't get in what they need. There is a lot of research being done, more so, you know, the ease of getting in as a cyclist versus a runner to push that 120 gram mark. But you're not going to necessarily get 120 grams of carbs in unless you've exactly kind of calculated to the T which products you're going to use, the times you're going to take it in, because, you know, that's a hell of a lot. So general recommendation is somewhere between 30 and 60 grams per hour. Nowadays, we know that we can tolerate up to 90, so more closely to 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. And I always like to work on a pre-workout recommendation of about 1 gram of carb per kg of your body weight. Yeah. And then obviously the closer you get towards start time, then you're going to drop that in terms of volume. And the further in kind of ahead of that start time, you're going to almost double, triple, quadruple that if you're eating 1, 2, 3 hours before start.
How do you kind of then get from that kind of 60 to 90? You know, what is the kind of process a kind of beginner would then work on to get there?
Ideally looking at increasing at about 10 grams of carbohydrate per week. We don't get a huge amount of time in our days or weeks to practice fueling strategies. So I always say try and practice at any time that your system is going to either be under stress or high intensity session, or when you're going to go out for a longer duration session. So basically that should give an average runner 1 or 2 opportunities every single week to to try and get that elevated kind of carb consumption in. And then you can do that with the products that you use. So if you're doing the whole food approach and you know that a banana is going to give you 20 grams of carbs and, the Future Life Oats bar is going to give you 20 grams of carbs, you could start seeing, okay, every single hour, this is a banana, a bar, and a gel that I'm needing to consume. Oops, where am I going to fit in the additional 10 grams of carbs? Maybe it's 3 or 4 wine gums, and you can slowly start to move up by then until you get to race day where you know every single hour I'm going to have half a bottle of juice, 5 wine gums, 1 bar, and 1 gel. Yeah. And that's what you then do and repeat.
And is it better to do less more often, or to do it like every 20 minutes or every hour? Like, or is there it just depends on you?
It's quite personal. I think I've got 2 types of athletes. I always recommend the person who's got a bit more of a sensitive tummy to rather trickle feed, so rather sip on product from start to finish as opposed to giving a massive glucose load in one setting. So you're not taking 30 or 40 grams of carbs in one whack. That can leave you feeling quite heavy or a little bit slushy in the tummy. In essence, your absorption rate is not going to be faster if you put in a whole heap at one go, because it's still limited to 1 to 1.6 grams of absorption of carbohydrate per minute. So if the person is going to be wanting a break from nutrition at some point, then sometimes we do respond to having a whack and then taking a breather. And if someone's got a bit more of a sensitive tummy to that, then I rather recommend that you're trickling in kind of from start to finish of event.
I think one of the things that I've often struggled with, especially like in the beginning, was picking up signs of I guess listening to your body and figuring out what exactly is wrong, and so what are the kind of signs that you look for in terms of dehydration? But how do you kind of determine what actually is going on? Is it dehydration? Is it over? How do you kind of actually determine that, or am I actually just feeling sick and I need to kind of pull out?
It's actually a good question because a lot of the symptoms overlap. So you've got similar symptoms for overhydration as you do for dehydration. Dehydration, you'll notice that you don't need a wee as frequently. That's why I say most athletes, most runners, or most kind of athletes in general get dehydrated during events. You'll start to see the concentration in your urine it becomes darker. Sometimes you've got other factors that influence that, like other products that you might be using or the nutrient composition. So your B vitamins might change the color of your urine, but darker, more pungent urine, stopping urination, fuzziness, headaches. You can get sunken eyes when you become severely dehydrated. You can get that dizziness type feeling. Your overhydration is also the severe nausea. You can get vomiting. Obviously, you can get frequent urination of just kind of clear fluid. You can get fuzziness or dizziness as well. So I always say to an athlete, if you can see what your environment is like and you've got an idea of what you've done, you can almost pinpoint it. So if you know that you're running in cold temperature, it's raining, it's not very humid, temperatures are quite low, it's winter, it's dark, you've started early, whatever it is, and you've been like whacking in with absolute diligence half a bottle of fluid every single hour, and you are starting to get that like dizziness, that fuzziness, bit of nausea, bit of sloshing in your tummy, like you are overhydrated. Pull out that liquid immediately. If you're getting that same nausea type feeling and you've been super diligent with your carbohydrates, you'll be getting in 60, 90 grams of carbs every single hour, but it's hot outside and your hydration and your glucose absorption is competing for water, then pull out your glucose and you should kind of settle a little bit. If you also know it's hot outside and you have been getting your glucose and you have been getting your hydration, you're just not feeling so good, like tummy's quite unsettled, you might be missing a bit of sodium. So those are generally, like, if you can simplify it again to water, sodium, and to glucose, you've probably miscalculated on one of those levels. The obvious ones are if you're getting cramp and you are doing an event that you shouldn't be doing because you're massively undercooked, like then also cramp is just muscle fatigue, sometimes more than not. But if you're ticking off all the boxes, you've trained properly, you're in good health, and you can look at the environment and see super hot or super cold, more than often we've made a bit of an error in judgment somewhere.
And is it kind of recommended to test, at that point, to sort of like maybe add a bit of glucose and see what happens, add a bit of sodium, see what happens?
Yeah.
Is it kind of that a recommended approach, or is it?
I sometimes say pull out, not pull out of the race, pull out the kind of the fueling strategies. So, you can add a little bit of sodium if you haven't been doing too much, but actually more often than not give yourself a little bit of a breather from too much of the glucose.
Yeah.
Knowing that you have put in previously. I mean, I wouldn't say don't have any glucose, knowing that you've gone into a 3-hour event and you haven't had anything until that moment, and now you're feeling crap, and now you're still pulling out the glucose. So it would be more of a stomach's not feeling so good, feeling a bit nauseous. I know I've done glucose. I know I've done water. Something's not sitting so nicely. I'd probably get some salt in me, and hold off on the others for kind of 45 minutes to an hour, see if I restabilize a little bit. Hydration is a little bit more scary to work with, because when you're looking at overhydrating or to a degree dehydrating, your system actually potentially would need an intravenous type of response, because you're not going to restabilize your electrolyte balance as fast as what you potentially need to. So if it is a point of you knowingly have potentially overhydrated, you actually treat it with caution. You'll become a bit puffy, you can look a little bit swollen. That would be a sign of overhydration as well. Dehydration as well, if you're going to just go and flood your system with water, you're going to further dehydrate, because your body's trying to regain homeostasis. So it's not going to hold that fluid if there isn't sodium adequate present. So then if you do suspect dehydration, then you don't just want to do water.
Yeah.
So that's why I say sometimes you actually need to hold off too much water if you don't have sodium. Add sodium if you haven't had any. Hold off glucose if you've had, but it's quite hot. Hold off water if it's cold and you've been drinking too much. So not always more is more. Sometimes it's a little bit about less.
Yeah, I think it's also important to kind of, and I guess, just kind of stop and, take a pause and kind of think about it before, doing anything kind of drastic.
Yeah, I'm working with a very interesting athlete at the moment, and she's just 100% been overdoing the hydration. But if you look at science and what she's done, it's bang on correct. There's nothing incorrect on paper until you get kind of chatting and you understand, very small athlete, very low sweat rate. The standards are just way too high in terms of estimation for her requirements.
Yeah, I guess if you feel like you fall out of the norm, then you should probably consult someone. And when you kind of personally finish, a race or a run, are you going liquid? Are you going solid? What is your kind of go-to?
Sure, I get suppressed appetite. I go liquid. I go liquid as best as I can, because I know that my appetite is not good, and I always do a little bit of a kind of a thought process in my mind. When is my next training session? Where am I in a training block? And then discipline comes into play, whether I kind of force something in, more a little bit of a mechanical approach to say it's non-negotiable, you have to get it in. But I'm definitely a liquid over solid person on completion of event. I kind of have a bit of a strategy that works quite nicely, which is more of a double recovery. So instead of having your full composition on the finish line and feeling really gross as a result, you can kickstart it with a degree of both, and then complete that in your next meal, which can be 2 hours after.
Going back, I guess, to when you started running, as well as when you kind of started in the dietetics world, what would it be the advice you would give to yourself, going back?
What did I give to myself? Slow down, I think. Slow down in the sense of not from a speed perspective or anything else, but learn to navigate nutrition before you've kind of made an error. And I think you and I spoke about this briefly on the phone the other day. If I can prevent anyone from ever doing what I've done wrong, I would be really chuffed. So I don't ever want to have someone, get dehydrated in the same way that I perhaps did from overdoing carbohydrate and underdoing kind of fluid intake. I would say that the more you invest in yourself, the better you're going to have as an outcome. And I think that, there are things like sweat testing that you can go and do, and there are products that are on the market that you can trial. And I think we're so quick to sell ourselves short that if you could, at the beginning stages of learn the most that you can about yourself, invest in a biokineticist, go and do a gait analysis, see what shoes best suit you, go and understand, I've had all the overuse injuries because I don't activate my glutes very well. So it doesn't just come down to nutrition, but I think sometimes to slow down to go forward is really important to understand the end goal and how you're going to get there, and transition there as slowly and as smoothly as possible, as opposed to getting there too fast and then kind of hitting a little bit of a speed block along the way.
And what's the most rewarding part of your job?
Sure, improvement. I think the satisfaction that I get personally with a patient who gets out of an event what they wanted to get out of, whether it be an improvement in time or whether it just be a completion of an event without pooping themselves. I know that sounds so trivial, but there are a lot of people out there that are actually scared to race because they've had such terrible experiences before. And I think that the confidence that you're able to instill in someone to say, these are the skills that you need. This will get you from point A to point B, or it will get you from point A to point B faster.
At the beginning, I mentioned the sock thing. So what 2 words would you have written on your sock?
I actually don't know. You told me to not put too much thought into it. I think maybe don't stop. I think we're quite quick to stop, but as long as one foot is going in front of the other, as long as one product is going in after the other, as long as you've got a strategy, you'll get there.
Yeah. Amazing. I love that. As always, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
That was brilliant. Subscribe to the Trail Chasers today and ensure that you never miss an episode. And if you know someone thinking about starting trail running, share this with them. It might be the nudge they need to join you.